I went to dinner with my sister-in-law, and the moment my eyes fell on the table next to me, my heart shattered into 1,000 silent pieces. I saw my wife, the one who had sworn to love me until the last day of our lives, smiling with a man who was not me, touching his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if all our love had evaporated without a trace. Her smile, so familiar, suddenly seemed like a stranger's. My sister-in-law, who had accompanied me that night to help me plan a surprise for the woman I thought was my soulmate, stood frozen in the scene, her fork suspended in midair, her eyes wide, as if she had seen a ghost. I felt my world crack in two, the sound of each heartbeat echoing like hammer blows in my ears as I got up from the table. I walked toward them with steps that seemed to weigh a ton, and as I approached, I saw her expression freeze, panic showing in every muscle of her face. Then, with a trembling but firm voice, I poured out the words that burned in my throat. I came here to plan the perfect trip for you. I brought your sister to find out what you liked so I could surprise you, and seeing you here with another man destroyed me inside. The silence that fell over that restaurant was so deep that I could hear the sound of my own breathing quickening, her shame exposed to everyone watching, her lover lowering his head as he tried to discreetly release her hand, but it was too late. I no longer needed explanations, no longer needed lies, and I turned my back, leaving behind not only that table, but the entire future I had dreamed of building with her. When my in-laws found out what had happened, the weight of disappointment that fell upon her was overwhelming. They could not look at their daughter with the same eyes, their voices carried the sadness of those who realized that the fruit of their love had betrayed not only a husband, but all the values they had learned at home. They told her, through tears and heavy sighs, that she might have lost the love of her life, that she might have destroyed her only chance of being happy with someone who truly loved her. And, surprisingly, in the first few days she showed no regret, she seemed blind, lost in empty justifications, immersed in an illusion of freedom that sounded like a sentence. She tried to live as if nothing had happened, but every corner of the house, every object, every smell, was a reminder of what she had thrown away. And every morning, when she woke up alone in her cold bed, the longing began to corrode her soul. Little by little, she began to revisit the places that were part of our history, the cafe where we shared our first kiss, the little square where we promised to start a family, the balcony where we laughed until late on summer nights. And in each of these places, the echo of my laughter, the memory of my touch, the feeling of my presence began to turn her into a prisoner of her own guilt. The memories haunted her like ghosts whispering painful truths. At night, the silence became deafening, the pillow a court that judged her without mercy. Her heart, which had once felt so sure of what it wanted, now beat out of rhythm with the regret that consumed her. She began to dream of me every night, she dreamed of my smile, of the way I hugged her when I was afraid, of the plans we made to grow old together. She woke up with tears and, for the first time, she understood that there is no freedom worth the destruction of true love. Meanwhile, I tried to pick up the pieces of what was left of me. At first, my chest burned with anger, my mind repeated the sound of that betrayal like a scratched record, the images of that night played incessantly in my head. But over time, the wounds began to heal, scars that reminded me of the pain, but also of the learning. I discovered that the worst loneliness is not being alone, but being with someone who lies while looking you in the eyes. I realized that pain has an expiration date, but dignity does not. I began to find myself again, to breathe without suffocating on bitter memories, to rediscover small pleasures that did not depend on it, the breeze of dawn, the smell of fresh coffee, the warmth of a sincere hug from someone who loved me without self-interest. One day, almost without realizing it, I truly smiled. And in that smile I realized that, even though it was broken, my heart still knew how to love, but no longer for her. Her pain, previously ignored, became unbearable when she found out I was moving on. She looked for me, tried to meet me in old cafes, called, sent messages, wrote long letters confessing her longing, but I was no longer there. I was already a different man, and she finally began to realize the true weight of her choices. Regret became her inseparable companion, her reflection in the mirror began to show not only the wrinkles of time, but also the scars of what she had destroyed. Each step she took towards a past that no longer existed made her lose herself even more. There was no point in seeking comfort in memories anymore, because now they were sharp knives cutting through her hopes of starting over with me. She sought comfort in her family, but found only looks of disappointment, words that reminded her that she had betrayed not only me, but everyone who believed in the love we claimed to have. Friends began to drift away, invitations to events disappeared, even social media became a minefield of painful memories and silent judgments. Meanwhile, with each dawn, I woke up lighter, more whole, more aware that I deserved someone who would choose me every day, even in the storms. I learned that true love does not betray, that those who love do not hide, that those who care do not destroy. And that life, despite its cruel lessons, always offers new paths for those who have the courage to move forward. But what tormented her the most were the visits to the places that marked our history. As she walked alone through streets that had witnessed our love, the wind seemed to whisper my name, each park bench became an altar of memories. She cried in secret, she even missed my flaws, the way I left the wet towel on the bed, my comfortable silences that today were abysses. The pain of regret devoured her alive. Meanwhile, I, who once thought I could not bear to live without her, discovered that true freedom was being true to myself, that no one is irreplaceable for those who learn to love themselves. And so, between one step and the next, I began to build a future that no longer included the one who destroyed me. And if at any point I thought I could forgive, all I had to do was look into her eyes again to understand that there was nothing there anymore. Just emptiness. The flame that once lit up our days was now ash. Today, I move forward without carrying unnecessary weight, without fear of love, but with the certainty that I deserve someone who doesn't make me doubt my worth. I learned that those who cheat not only lose the other person, but also lose themselves, and that the consequences of a wrong choice can echo forever. But what happened after that night at the restaurant, when I left behind everything we were? Did she have the courage to face her regret, or did she get lost forever in her own lies? And me, did I manage to find a new love, or did I choose to walk alone? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of cheating. Our stories are completely fictional and aim to show how infidelity can destroy lives, hearts, and families. Now get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and turns and deep lessons. Press play and get ready to hear a shocking story that will stir your emotions. Lucas has always been the kind of man who wore the smile of someone who knew how to love intensely, with a look that seemed to see into the soul of whoever was in front of him. From a young age, he learned from his parents that true love was not just about kisses and hugs, but about patience, companionship, and daily choices to stay by the side of the one you love even on the hardest days. That was how, at the age of 25, he met Helena on a rainy afternoon, when they both took shelter in a charming coffee shop downtown. He was holding a broken umbrella and laughing at his own misfortune, while she offered to share hers, enchanted by the light-hearted way he had of seeing life. Since that meeting, they built a connection that seemed unbeatable, conversations flowed effortlessly, silences were comfortable, and there was always a touch of care in every word exchanged. Helena was his opposite in many ways. While Lucas was impulsive, she was organized, every detail of her day meticulously planned, from the color of her nail polish to the exact time to water the plants on the balcony of the apartment they shared, and this difference became the perfect balance that sustained their relationship. The setting in which they decided to live together seemed like something out of a dream, a small loft decorated with books stacked on makeshift shelves, colorful pillows thrown on the couch, paintings bought at local artists' fairs. In the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning mixed with the sound of the jazz vinyl that Lucas loved to play while he prepared breakfast. On Sundays, Helena organized brunches for her closest friends, and the house was filled with laughter, toasting glasses, conversations that ranged from politics to confessions of broken hearts. Lucas loved watching Helena in these moments, the way she moved around the kitchen with ease, how she laughed out loud without being afraid to be happy, how she placed her hand on his chest when a story moved her. For him, every detail of the routine they built was proof that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, living what seemed to be a love story immune to time. During the week, Lucas worked as a graphic designer at a small agency, spending his afternoons between screens and colors, transforming ideas into pieces that told stories. He was proud of what he did, but even more so of what he built with Helena, the way they supported each other in moments of uncertainty, like when she decided to quit her job at an accounting firm to open her own ceramics studio, a dream she had had since childhood. When Helena told him about her decision, he held her by the shoulders, looked into her eyes and told her that life was too short not to follow her heart. The emotion of that day remained etched in her memory, as did every morning he left notes on the fridge with phrases like, "You are my best place," or, "Today will be an incredible day, because you exist." These small gestures made Helena feel loved in a way she had never experienced before, fueling the certainty that she had found in Lucas a man who not only said he loved her, but proved it in every detail. Their family, united from the beginning, was also part of the universe they created. Lucas's parents adored Helena, who always prepared his favorite recipes when they came to visit. Helena's parents saw Lucas as the ideal son-in-law, kind, attentive, hardworking. Her sisters, Laura and Marina, often spent weekends in the couple's loft, transforming the living room into a veritable camp of movies, pillows, and popcorn. Lucas was proud of this bond, felt that his life became more complete with the presence of her family, and believed that each smile shared between them was another brick in the construction of the love he wanted to last forever. Over time, the routine began to take shape in habits that only those who love someone understand. Lucas would come home from work and, even exhausted, would sit down to listen to Helena tell him about each piece she made in her studio, the stories of the clients who were moved when they received their handmade cups and plates, and the dreams she had of expanding her business. He listened to her with genuine interest, proud of each of her achievements, celebrating each sale as if it were his own. Helena, in turn, found pleasure in preparing special dinners for Lucas, even on ordinary days, and when she saw him walk through the door, she would run to hug him as if each reunion were the first, as if their love needed to be remembered and reaffirmed every day. This mutual care made any obstacle seem small, strengthening the certainty that they had something rare in their hands, something that many people spend their lives without finding. In their free time, they traveled to nearby cities, exploring trails, discovering restaurants hidden in cobblestone streets, collecting memories that they turned into albums filled with handwritten notes. Each photograph captured sincere smiles, long hugs, glances that seemed to be communicating without words. Their car, a silver hatchback that already showed some signs of age, was a witness to their deepest conversations, the songs sung in chorus on the road, the arguments that ended with apologies followed by kisses. Lucas loved to remember the day when, on one of these trips, they stopped at a viewpoint to watch the sunset, and Helena, with tears in her eyes, said that she had never felt so at peace as when she was by his side. This confession was tattooed in his memory as proof that they had built something solid, something that would withstand the storms. Their social life was also intense. Helena was engaging, made friends easily, and won everyone over with her affectionate manner, while Lucas was more reserved, preferring deep conversations in smaller groups, but admired the light she spread wherever she went. Together, they balanced their differences delicately, finding harmony even in contrasts. The couple's friends often commented on how they seemed made for each other, how their connection inspired those around them to believe in love. When moments of tension arose, they were always followed by sincere dialogues, looks that sought understanding, hugs that sealed silent agreements that nothing and no one could separate them. But not everything was perfect. Lucas would sometimes get frustrated with Helena's need to control every detail of the future, while she would get annoyed with the way he would leave things unfinished at home, like DIY projects or piles of papers on the table. Even so, they both learned to give in, to see each other's flaws as an opportunity to practice patience and reinforce their choice to stay together. Helena, despite her quirks, admired the way Lucas could turn bad days into good memories with just his light humor, and Lucas, despite his aloof ways, found in her discipline the organization he needed to keep his dreams in order. Their love was not perfect, but it was true, shaped by the small victories of everyday life. Their plans for the future seemed as clear as the photographs they kept so dearly. They talked about buying a bigger house in a quiet neighborhood, about adopting a dog, maybe two, and having children when they felt the time was right. At night, before going to sleep, they made lists of what they wanted to accomplish together, laughing as they imagined the trips they would still take, the courses they wanted to take, the recipes they would learn to impress each other. Between the sheets, they exchanged vows of love that seemed immune to the wear and tear of time. They hugged each other as if the outside world could not reach them. They protected themselves from their deepest fears with the silent promise to never give up on each other. Helena's studio began to stand out in the city, attracting clients from more distant neighborhoods, and she began to dedicate herself even more to creating her pieces, immersing herself in a universe of colors, textures and ideas that made her feel alive. Lucas supported each new venture, from craft fairs to exhibitions that she organized in small cafes. He was proud of her, not only for her talent, but for her courage in pursuing her dreams. He, in turn, found in the routine of working at the agency the opportunity to expand his creative horizons, creating campaigns that caught the attention of larger companies, which began to realize their potential. The feeling of joint growth made them believe that they were building a solid life, where the success of one was the victory of both. Between the hustle and bustle of the days, Wednesday nights were sacred to them. It was when they set aside time to be alone, without friends, without cell phones, just the two of them, often preparing complicated recipes that turned out completely wrong and resulted in laughter that echoed throughout the house. These moments were the fuel of their relationship, the reminder that love lived in the little things, in unpretentious gestures, in the complicity that makes any adversity seem smaller. And so, even when the weeks became tiring, there was always the promise that those nights would be theirs, a ritual that renewed the flame that kept them together. The friendship with Laura, Helena's sister, was also an essential part of this balance. She had become Lucas' confidant, someone with whom he shared his insecurities, doubts, and joys. Laura admired the way he took care of Helena and, on many occasions, she acted as a bridge between them when disagreements arose. Her presence strengthened the family bond, bringing lightness to difficult days and providing moments of connection that made everyone feel part of something greater than just a relationship between two people. This shared universe, where everyone had an important role, seemed like the perfect recipe for lasting happiness. However, amidst so many dreams, encounters and promises, what no one knew was that life, no matter how perfect it seemed, held secrets that not even the purest love could protect. Every smile exchanged, every tight hug, every sunny morning, built not only the foundation of a love story, but also the stage where, soon, painful truths would come to light, testing every promise made, every certainty they believed they had. And in that scenario that seemed unshakable, destiny began to weave silent plots that would forever change the paths they believed they had traced together. Lucas began to feel that the weeks were longer than they used to be, that the minutes at home dragged on as if time were conspiring against the peace that had always reigned there. Helena, who had once been so present, seemed increasingly distant. She smiled with her body, but her eyes betrayed thoughts that she no longer shared. There were times when Lucas would find her lost, staring at her cell phone screen as if there was something consuming her more than any word of his could reach. Wednesday nights, once sacred, began to be postponed by commitments that Helena said were unavoidable, and when they were together, the connection that had once seemed unbreakable became increasingly fragile, as if the silence between them began to speak louder than any conversation. Her hands, which had previously sought his on the couch, were now always busy with her cell phone, her eyes always alert to notifications, as if she were expecting something that he could not give. Lucas tried to ignore the small cracks that were forming. He told himself that it was just the stress of the studio growing, the tiredness of sleepless nights preparing new collections, but inside him a fear grew silently. Signs began to multiply like little needles in his confidence. Helena started leaving later than usual, saying she needed extra time at the studio to organize orders and make important deliveries, but when Lucas offered to help, she declined with a tight smile, as if the idea of sharing those moments was more of a nuisance than a relief. Her scent, when she arrived home, sometimes carried perfumes he didn't recognize, masculine fragrances that blended subtly but that sounded like silent alarms to him. Her clothes, once impeccable, came home with marks that didn't seem like paint or clay, but rather of hugs that weren't his. There were afternoons when Lucas tried to call her just to hear her voice and be comforted, but the calls went to voicemail repeatedly, something that had never happened before. The feeling of emptiness began to settle in his chest, a constant pressure that made even the air heavier. Laura, Helena's sister, began to notice that something was different. She had always been sensitive to details that others ignored, and she noticed how Helena would change the subject when she asked about Lucas, how she seemed restless when the phone rang and she saw her husband's name on the screen. Laura tried to convince herself that maybe it was just a phase, that every long-term relationship goes through moments of distance, but there was something in her instinct that made her doubt. She began to visit her sister without warning, seeking answers in expressions and attitudes that didn't need words to be understood. On one of these visits, she found Helena abruptly ending a call, changing her tone of voice when she saw her, and noticed a slight tremor in her hands. Helena explained that she was just a demanding client, but Laura left the studio certain that there was something much bigger and deeper going on. During that time, Lucas began planning a trip to surprise Helena for their 5th wedding anniversary. He dreamed of taking her to a cabin in the mountains, where they could rekindle the flame that seemed threatened by the wear and tear of everyday life. He arranged everything with Laura, who was excited about the idea and offered to help choose details that would make the surprise perfect. They began exchanging messages about the places Helena would like to visit, the dishes she liked the most, the flowers that moved her. For Lucas, those preparations were like an antidote to the anxiety that was taking hold in his heart. He believed that by reminding Helena how much she was loved, they could find their way back to each other, rebuilding the bond that he thought had only weakened. The days leading up to the planned dinner to discuss the surprise were marked by a mixture of anticipation and fear. Lucas, overcome by the excitement of the plan, bought tickets, reserved the chalet and even ordered a simple but meaningful ring, symbolizing the renewal of the vows he wanted to propose amidst the landscapes they had once promised to visit together. He began to imagine what it would be like to see her face light up again, as if those dark days had never existed. Helena, on the other hand, began to show uneasiness every time he hugged her, subtly turned her face away when he tried to kiss her, avoided long conversations, as if she feared that the truth would spill out of her lips at any moment. The night of the dinner arrived. Lucas and Laura had arranged to meet at a charming restaurant that Helena loved, a cozy place where they had celebrated several birthdays and special occasions. Soft music filled the room, candles cast dancing shadows over the tables, creating an atmosphere that brought back memories of happy times. Lucas was nervous but excited, detailing to Laura every part of the trip itinerary, the times, the tours, the restaurants he wanted to visit with Helena. Laura smiled, but couldn't hide the lump in her throat. She felt torn between happiness for her brother-in-law's efforts and growing fear of what she suspected, as if fate were about to play a cruel trick. Amidst the low laughter and clinking glasses, time seemed to conspire to prolong the calm before the storm. It was then that the waiter led them to the reserved table. As they sat down, Lucas noticed a familiar scent hanging in the air, an aroma that intertwined with memories of hugs and nights shared. He turned his head almost instinctively and what he saw made the world around him stop. At a nearby table, Helena was sitting across from an unknown man, so absorbed in the conversation that she didn't notice his presence. She smiled, gestured, touched the other man's hand as if it were the most natural gesture in the world, as if there, at that table, she was living a parallel life in which Lucas did not exist. The shock went through his body like an electric current, each heartbeat sounding like thunder in his ears. Laura, who had followed his gaze, put her hand to her mouth to contain a cry of surprise, her eyes wide open at the scene that confirmed all her worst premonitions. Lucas stood still, the wine glass trembling in his hand, as memories of what they had built together flashed through his mind like painful flashes. Helena, who had not noticed their presence until then, leaned forward and, in an almost choreographed movement, moved even closer to the man who was with her, as if they were sharing whispered secrets that belonged to no one else. Time seemed to expand, each second turning into an eternity. The air became dense, difficult to breathe, and Lucas had to hold on to the edge of the table to keep from falling. He tried to rationalize, to look for an innocent explanation, but her gaze, the way she smiled, revealed an intimacy that could no longer be denied. The words that had built their story together echoed in his mind like cruel mockery. The promises of eternal love, the shared dreams, every gesture of affection that I thought was true, now disappeared like smoke. Laura, at his side, whispered that maybe it would be better for them to leave, but Lucas knew he wouldn't be able to sleep without understanding, without confronting the woman who once promised never to hurt him. He stood up slowly, feeling every muscle in his body weigh down as if it were dragging invisible chains, and took the first steps toward the table where Helena was laughing, oblivious to the nightmare that was about to begin. The noise in the room seemed distant, muffled by the sound of his own ragged breathing. When he stopped in front of her, the silence that fell was so absolute that it seemed to have sucked the air out of the entire restaurant. Helena looked up and, upon meeting his eyes, all the color drained from her face, her lips trembling in an almost imperceptible movement. The man in front of her, confused, looked at Lucas without understanding what was happening, but the connection between her and the other man was too obvious to be doubted. Lucas took a deep breath, and even with his voice failing, he managed to articulate the words that exploded in his chest, throwing them like sharp blades that cut through the veil of lies that covered his days. "I came here to plan the perfect trip for you. I brought your sister to find out what you liked so I could surprise you, and seeing you here with another man, it destroyed me inside." The silence turned into a suffocating weight. The people at the nearby tables looked away, embarrassed, but they couldn't help but peek at the scene that seemed to come from a drama that no one would have imagined witnessing that night. Helena's gaze, once so full of brightness, was now dull, empty, as if his soul had been ripped out along with the certainties he carried. Laura, with tears in her eyes, held Lucas's hand as if it were the only anchor that could keep him from collapsing completely. The man next to Helena mumbled something inaudible, visibly uncomfortable, trying to release her hand that remained frozen on the table. Lucas felt his heart beating so hard that he was afraid he would faint, but he found the strength to turn his back and leave behind everything he thought he knew about love. The restaurant began to breathe again, the voices rose in tone again, but for him, nothing would make sense as before. And as he walked through the door of the dining room, the world he had built began to crumble, setting the stage for even more painful truths that would soon come to light. The silence of the restaurant was just the beginning of the echo that spread throughout Lucas's life, reverberating to the most hidden corners of his heart. In the days that followed, he took refuge in places that had no memory of Helena, walked down streets they had never shared, slept in cheap hotels where the impersonal smell of the sheets kept him from any memory of her. Laura tried to get in touch, left worried messages, but he couldn't talk to anyone. He had to process every scene, every word said, every smile he thought was real and that now turned out to be a veil for lies so deep he didn't even dare imagine. The nights became longer than ever, the darkness seemed to whisper the doubts that tormented him. What else could she have hidden from him? How could someone who once promised eternal love betray him so coldly? The weight of these questions pushed him to the bottom of an emotional abyss, where the only way out was to confront the truths that were still hidden amidst the shadows of what was left of their relationship. When he finally returned home, he was greeted by the echo of emptiness. The sound of keys jingling in the door seemed amplified by the absence of voices, the lack of footsteps, the coldness of the air that circulated through the rooms. The apartment was in order, as if nothing had happened, but the stillness brought with it a smell of abandonment, as if each object were a silent testimony of everything that had been destroyed. On the table in the living room, he found an envelope with his name written in careful letters. His hands trembled as he opened it and took out a long, handwritten letter in which Helena tried to explain the inexplicable. In each paragraph, she said she felt guilty, spoke of loneliness, of fear that the love between them had cooled, of having felt invisible even when surrounded by gestures of affection. But that wasn't what Lucas wanted to know. He needed to understand why she had made all that effort to hide the truth, he needed to know what had led her to risk everything. He decided he couldn't live without answers. He sent a curt message asking them to meet to talk, and despite her initial resistance, Helena agreed to see him. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe, far from the places they used to go together, as if they both knew that nothing could ever be the same again. When she arrived, she seemed like a different person, haggard, her eyes tired, her shoulders hunched as if she were carrying the weight of the world. He watched her in silence, searching in her features for some reminder of the woman he had loved, but everything seemed different. When they finally sat down face to face, the silence between them stretched out for minutes, until Helena took a deep breath, wiped away the tears that insisted on welling up, and began to speak. She said she knew that nothing she said could erase what she had done, but that she needed to tell him everything, because there was more than Lucas imagined. With a choked voice, she revealed that not only was she seeing another man, but that this man was someone very close to her. He was Laura's ex-boyfriend, her own sister, someone who was part of the family's inner circle, someone everyone knew, someone who had sat at the same table at Sunday lunches. She said that she had met this man again by chance at an art exhibition and, at first, she thought it was just nostalgia, but that, when she realized that he admired her in a way that she thought she had lost in her marriage, she let herself be enveloped by compliments and words that fed her insecurities. She said that each encounter was a mixture of regret and pleasure, that she tried to stop, but that she felt incapable of breaking the cycle that held her back. Her words felt like knives cutting Lucas' raw flesh, who felt his breath catch with each sentence. The floor of the cafe seemed to move away from her feet, the table between them becoming an abyss. Lucas couldn't speak, but Helena continued, as if the words, now released, could no longer be contained. She said that Laura suspected something, that during one of their meetings she had seen the man from afar, but hadn't had the courage to ask, that since then she had been trying to protect Lucas, even without proof, hoping that it was all just a mistake. She also revealed that, in the last few months, her lover had started to pressure her to end the marriage, saying that he was in love, that he wanted to make the relationship official, and that, frightened, she began to live in panic, torn between the fear of losing the life she had built and the shame of facing her family. It was then that Helena, in a broken whisper, admitted that, on the night of the dinner, she had intended to talk to her lover to put an end to it, but hadn't had the courage. Lucas's hands clenched into fists on the table, and he had to restrain himself from shouting, so as not to attract the attention of everyone around him. Through her tears, she confessed something that completely disarmed him. She told him that she had gotten pregnant by him, her lover, a few weeks earlier, but that she had suffered a miscarriage and never told anyone. She said that during the period when she believed she was pregnant, she had lived nights of terror imagining what it would be like to raise a child from a forbidden relationship, and that the loss of the baby made her feel like it was a divine punishment, that it was then that she began to realize the size of the mistake she had made. Lucas's face turned pale, the words stuck in his throat. The revelation exploded in his mind like a thunderclap, bringing up questions he never wanted to have to ask. What if the baby had been born? Would she stay with her lover? Would she abandon everything they had built together? He held his head in his hands, trying to organize his thoughts that were racing against each other, but everything seemed to be collapsing like a house of cards. Helena tried to hold his hand, but he pushed it away with a firm movement, as if the simple touch could contaminate him with the lies she had woven for so long. She asked him to listen to her until the end, to understand that she still loved him, that she deeply regretted it. Lucas looked up, his eyes red as if he had cried too much, and asked how she could deceive him with someone who was part of their lives, someone he called a friend. He asked how she was able to turn every happy memory into torment, every smile into doubt, every hug into a scar. Helena, sobbing, repeated that she could not explain, that she had lost herself in a void she could not understand, that she felt despicable and that she was willing to face any consequence to win back his forgiveness. Lucas stood up slowly, the sound of his chair echoing in the silent cafe, all eyes on them. With a firm but choked voice, he said that he didn't know if he would ever be able to forgive her, but that he knew he couldn't continue living with someone who had turned his love into an illusion. He said that perhaps one day he would find peace, but that at that moment he needed to move away, he needed to find himself again, away from her presence. Before leaving, he looked into Helena's eyes for the last time, searching for some trace of the woman he had once loved, but all he found was the reflection of a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. On the way out, Lucas bumped into Laura, who was arriving at the cafe with a tense face. She had followed Helena, suspicious of the encounter, and now, upon seeing her brother-in-law's condition, she understood that the truth had finally been revealed. Laura's eyes met Lucas's, and in that brief moment of silence, everything was said without words, the pain, the disappointment, the feeling of betrayal that extended beyond the couple, reaching the entire family like waves of destruction. Laura approached him and hugged him, a tight and silent hug that, for a moment, seemed to be the only anchor in the midst of the rough sea that his life had become. As he felt the warmth of her embrace, silent tears began to fall, not only for the pain of what he had lost, but for the mourning of everything he had dreamed of and that could never be rebuilt. And so, between revealed secrets and torn hearts, the certainties that once seemed eternal fell apart like ashes carried by the wind, paving the way for an uncertain future that would inevitably be born from the ruins of what was destroyed. Lucas left the cafe feeling as if his feet weren't touching the ground, as if each step was a superhuman effort given the weight he now carried. The world around him seemed to spin in slow motion, people's voices blending into a distant, meaningless noise. The sun was already beginning to hide behind the buildings and the city was taking on golden hues that, on any other day, he would have found beautiful. But at that moment it was as if the glow of the sunset only highlighted the emptiness inside him, the cruel contrast between what the world showed him and what he felt. He walked aimlessly, without a destination, crossing streets, crossing squares, trying to find air amidst the suffocation that filled his chest. He remembered the promises made, the knowing glances, the whispered conversations before going to sleep, and all of that now seemed like a made-up story, a tale that someone had told to later take away his hope. The sound of approaching footsteps took him out of his spiral of thoughts for a moment, and when he turned around, he found Laura coming after him, her face worried, her eyes teary but determined. She reached out to him and told him that he didn't have to go through this alone, that she was there for whatever he needed, but Lucas just nodded silently, unable to find words that fit the pain he felt. The two continued walking, side by side, as if movement itself was the only way to stay upright. They reached a secluded park, where the noise of the city seemed distant, and sat on a wooden bench worn by time. Lucas rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the ground covered in dry leaves, while Laura remained by his side, respecting the silence, understanding that sometimes the best gesture was to just be there. The wind swayed the trees and spread the smell of damp earth, and for a moment, Lucas closed his eyes trying to find some comfort in that light breeze, but all he felt was a deep tiredness, as if every muscle in his body was crying out for rest and his soul for peace. It was Laura who broke the silence, saying that he was strong, that she admired the way he had always taken care of Helena and everyone around him, but that now was the time for him to take care of himself, to prioritize himself. Lucas looked at her and, for the first time, allowed the tears to flow without resistance, without shame, like a river that had been dammed for a long time and was now overflowing, taking with it the pain, the mourning for everything he had lost. When night fell completely, Laura convinced him to go to her house. There, she made a hot tea, lit the room only by the living room lamp, and sat next to him on the couch. Silence reigned once again, but it was a less heavy silence, almost welcoming. Lucas then spoke, in a low, hoarse voice, that he felt betrayed on every possible level, that he didn't know how he would rebuild his life after so many crushing truths. Laura listened to him attentively, and when he finished, she held his hands and told him that he was still the honest man, the kind man, that everything he had lost was not his fault, that Helena's mistakes did not diminish who he was. And these words, although they did not erase the pain, lit a spark of strength in him, a reminder that, despite everything, there was a path forward. That night, he slept in the guest room of Laura's house, and sleep came as a relief, a temporary refuge from the chaos that his mind insisted on revisiting. The following days were filled with practical decisions, although his emotions were still in shambles. Lucas sought out a lawyer, began the separation process, gathered the necessary documents, and faced cold and painful meetings where the couple's story was reduced to papers, numbers, and agreements. Each signature felt like a stab wound, but also like a liberation, as if he were gradually freeing himself from the chains of a life that no longer belonged to him. Helena tried to get closer, sending messages, calling, asking to meet, but Lucas kept his distance. He knew that any word she said at that moment would just be salt in open wounds. Laura stood by him at every stage, went to meetings whenever she could, and was the friendly presence he didn't even know he needed so much. One afternoon, after one of the hearings, Lucas decided to walk to the old neighborhood where he spent his childhood. He wanted to remember who he was before all that, he wanted to reconnect with his roots. As he passed in front of the school where he studied, he felt a warmth in his chest, as if that pure and distant memory was a reminder that he existed long before Helena, that there was more to him than just the role of a betrayed husband. She sat on the wall in front of the courtyard, watching the children play, and for a moment let the warm breeze bring back happy memories, free from the weight of the present. There, he decided that he would not let the pain define him, that, although the scars were permanent, he would choose to move forward, to start over from scratch if necessary, but without carrying the chains of a past that could not be changed. It was during this process of reconstruction that fate, once again, prepared a surprise for him. A month after his last conversation with Helena, Lucas received a message from Laura asking to see him urgently. He found her tone strange and went to meet her, who was waiting for him in a discreet café, the same one where, weeks before, his life had fallen apart. When they sat down, Laura took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears, and said that there was something he needed to know, something that she had discovered and could no longer keep inside. Lucas felt his entire body freeze, fearing that new painful truths would come to light. Laura, with a trembling voice, revealed that, after everything, she felt indebted to him and began to put together the pieces of what she had seen and heard over the months. And that was how he discovered that the man Helena was cheating on him with was not just an ex-boyfriend of his, but someone who, in recent years, had gotten closer to the family with ulterior motives, someone who, in the past, had already caused destruction in other relationships, someone known for manipulating, for getting involved with committed women and then abandoning them. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Laura, with tears streaming down her face, said that the man in question had taken advantage of Helena's emotional fragility during a crisis she had experienced alone, a crisis that no one knew about because she hid it well, a phase of silent depression, camouflaged by smiles, sweet words, and automatic gestures. For months, Helena felt lost, without ground, without direction, without the courage to share with Lucas out of shame, out of fear of disappointing him. And it was in this emotional vacuum that the man infiltrated himself, offering what seemed to be support and understanding, until, little by little, he transformed their friendship into something that Helena, fragile, did not know how to contain. Laura's words sounded like stabs, but at the same time like missing pieces in the puzzle of pain that Lucas had been trying to put together since that fateful night. He remained silent, absorbing every detail, every nuance of the story that he had never imagined. It was not a relief, it was not an automatic forgiveness, but it was as if, for the first time, he understood the complexity of what had happened, the web of emotions, fears and human failures that culminated in the disaster that destroyed what they had built. Laura, when she finished, said that she did not want to justify Helena, that nothing could erase the betrayal, but that he deserved to know the whole truth, because that was what honest men like him deserved, clarity, respect, even if it was late. Lucas thanked her, his voice choked, his heart heavy, but with a strange sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would still be long, that the mourning for everything he had lost would still be with him for a long time, but at least now, there were answers. And sometimes, answers are all that is left when love has already said goodbye. The revelation Laura had left at that meeting seemed to have changed something in the way Lucas saw the last few months of his life. He left the cafe with a heavy body, but his mind flooded with thoughts that wouldn't stop, as if the pieces of a puzzle had finally fit together, forming a harsh and nuanced portrait of the reality he was reluctant to accept. The words echoed in his memory, not as a justification for what Helena had done, but as a new layer of a deeper and more uncomfortable truth. There was much more than betrayal, there was hidden pain, unspoken loneliness, emotional chasms that had opened up between them while he, distracted by his own routines and certainties, failed to see them. It wasn't his fault, he knew that, but the feeling of having failed to protect what he loved most corroded him like a slow and relentless rust. As he walked down the streetlights reflected in the puddles formed by the recent rain, and each reflection seemed to mock everything he believed to be indestructible. The following days were filled with almost painful introspection, moments in which Lucas found himself revisiting conversations, expressions, and small gestures of Helena's that, at the time, he had interpreted as simple tiredness or distraction, but which now took on new meaning. He wondered how far love can go before it is completely lost, how far a man can fight for something that no longer exists. There was a dilemma that haunted him, whether to move forward with his heart shielded, incapable of opening itself up to any bond again, or to try, somehow, to reclaim within himself the faith in love, the belief that, despite everything, he could still build something true. But how could he start over, when everything he had experienced seemed marked by scars that reminded him, every time he looked in the mirror, that even the strongest bonds can be broken by what cannot be seen. Lucas's pain was no longer just about the betrayal, but about what it represented, proof that even the most beautiful loves can get lost along the way if they are not cared for with the attention they deserve. The house, which used to be a home, became an empty space, full of glaring absences. Lucas avoided spending too much time there, preferring to lose himself in long walks, in parks and streets that reminded him of who he was before all that. It was on one of these walks that he began to notice small details of the life around him that had previously gone unnoticed: the smile of a stranger helping an elderly woman with her bags, the child flying a kite with eyes shining with joy, the elderly couple who sat on the same park bench every day to share a simple snack. These were banal scenes, but they rekindled a spark of hope in Lucas, a reminder that love, in its purest form, still existed in the world, even if, at that moment, he didn't know how or when he would be able to experience it again. It was as if the universe insisted on showing him that, despite the losses, life was still generous to those who allowed themselves to see it. At the same time, Helena continued to try to get closer. She sought out meetings, wrote letters, sent messages full of regret and longing. She wanted to explain, she wanted to be heard, she wanted Lucas to see in her the woman he had loved and not just the one who had made a mistake. But he, despite understanding her pain, was still unable to make room for this reunion. He had a deep respect for what they had experienced, but also a vital need to rebuild himself before taking any step towards the past. The struggle within Lucas was silent and cruel. He did not want to see her suffer, but he knew he could not offer her what she was looking for. Sometimes he was tempted to respond to the messages, to find solace in her for his own loneliness, but something stronger prevented him, like an inner voice telling him that this was not the way forward, that he had to first reconnect with himself before doing anything else. It was in the midst of this storm of feelings that an unexpected invitation came. A coworker, knowing part of what Lucas was going through, asked him to join a volunteer group that organized events at an institution for underprivileged children. Lucas, who had felt no purpose in anything for a long time, accepted without much thought, like someone grabbing a rope thrown in the middle of a shipwreck. In that simple place, surrounded by small smiles and hopeful eyes, he rediscovered something he had long thought lost: the ability to give without expecting anything in return, to connect with others through the most genuine kindness. Each afternoon spent there was a balm, a breath of life that helped him rediscover himself in the simplest gestures. And it was on one of those afternoons that he met Marina, a woman with a serene look and a sweet voice, someone who also carried marks of past pain, but who, like him, sought to transform her own story into something greater. Marina was not someone who invaded, she was not someone who questioned. She listened, smiled gently, and offered her presence without demands. Lucas, still cautious, felt that for the first time in a long time he could breathe next to someone without fear, without the weight of expectations. The conversations with her were light, the silences comfortable. There was no rush, no promises, just the sharing of moments that, together, began to rebuild Lucas's trust in the other and, above all, in himself. Still, inside him, the dilemma persisted: how to make room for the new when his heart still held the ruins of what was destroyed. How to allow another person to get close without carrying with him the ghosts of the past. The answer did not come easily, but with each encounter with Marina, with each genuine smile exchanged with a child from the institution, Lucas felt that time was slowly healing what pain had torn apart. Meanwhile, Helena was drowning in her own regret. The nights were long, the days dragged on, and the void left by Lucas seemed to fill her with guilt and longing. She tried to start over in many ways, sought therapy, isolated herself for a while to try to understand herself, but each attempt brought back a painful reminder of what she had lost. Their apartment, now hers alone, was a museum of memories, where every object, every photo forgotten in a drawer, was a cruel reminder of the love she had destroyed with her own hands. There were times when she would pick up the phone and type long messages to Lucas, but would delete them before sending them, understanding that perhaps the greatest proof of love she could give now was to set him free to follow the path he deserved. The meetings with her family, once so full of life, became awkward, their looks filled with pity and disappointment. She understood, accepted, but it hurt like nothing had ever hurt before. The weeks turned into months, and Lucas, even with the progress, still found himself, at times, on the edge of the abyss of memories. The places they frequented, the smells, the songs that played randomly on the radio, everything could be a trigger for a sadness that, although milder, still existed. But something had changed, he no longer let himself sink. Allowing himself to feel, but also allowing himself to continue, Lucas began to make new plans, small at first, but full of meaning. He started running again, traveling to small towns he didn't know, venturing down paths he had always put off. And each step was a reminder that there was life beyond the pain, beyond the past, beyond the scars. The dilemma that accompanied him, between moving forward or giving in to longing and memories, was no longer a prison. It was now a choice. And he chose, each day, to rebuild, piece by piece, his own happiness. In the days that followed, Lucas immersed himself even more in his volunteer routine, seeking in the small gestures he made for the children a way to heal the wounds that still throbbed inside him. Each smile he received was like a breath of fresh air that reminded him that life, despite all its hardships, continued to offer moments of tenderness. It was in this environment that he and Marina began to meet more frequently, sharing not only the time they dedicated to others, but also increasingly in-depth conversations about their stories, fears and dreams. The afternoons at the institute began to stretch until nightfall, when they said goodbye with long hugs, which gradually replaced the awkward silence of the beginning with a complicity that blossomed slowly, without the need for labels or expectations that neither of them were yet ready to assume. It was on one of those afternoons, while they were tidying up the toys scattered around the main room, that Marina, in a soft voice, commented how much she admired Lucas's strength to continue helping, even while carrying such great pain. He smiled slightly, feeling a comforting warmth spread through his chest, and replied that he didn't know if it was strength or just fear of stopping and being consumed by memories. Marina looked at him sweetly and said that maybe it was both, but that in any case, he was no longer alone. Her gaze held his with a serenity that Lucas hadn't seen in a long time, and in that moment something broke inside him, a wall that, since the betrayal, he had built to protect himself from new pain. He felt the tears come, warm and silent, and Marina approached, hugging him gently. It was a hug that asked for nothing in return, that didn't demand explanations, it just offered presence, and Lucas allowed himself to cry there, without reservations, feeling the pain finally find a safe space to come out. When they parted, Lucas took a deep breath, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. Marina invited him to walk to the nearby square, and accepting the invitation felt natural, as if it were an extension of that moment of openness. The square was quiet, bathed in the soft golden light of the late afternoon, children ran around laughing, couples walked hand in hand, and everything seemed peaceful. They sat on a wooden bench, next to a leafy tree that swayed gently in the wind. Marina, looking ahead, said that she had also been betrayed in the past, that she also knew the feeling of being ripped from the ground, of having her dreams shattered without warning. She told him how it took her a while to trust herself again, how it took her time to realize that she was no less worthy of love for having been hurt. Lucas listened to her in silence, absorbing each word as a reminder that he was not the only one with scars, that it was still possible, one day, to look forward without feeling that each step was a threat. When the sun had completely disappeared, Marina turned to him and, in a voice almost above a whisper, said that she believed that the right people arrive at the right time, even if that time doesn't seem perfect. Lucas looked away for a moment, feeling his heart race at the possibility of allowing someone back into his world. But before he could answer, Marina added that she wasn't there to rush him or to heal something that only time could heal, that she was just there to walk beside him, as a friend, as someone who understood what it was like to have a broken heart. Her words, so unpretentious, had more of an effect on Lucas than any promise of love could have, because they showed him that there was room for new beginnings built with patience, respect, and understanding. Meanwhile, Helena continued to face her own battles. The regret she felt consumed her in waves that varied between deep sadness and self-anger. She tried to keep herself busy with work, tried to fill her free time with courses, therapy, and meetings with the friends she had left, but nothing seemed to take away the pain of having destroyed what she loved most. Sometimes, she would walk down the streets she used to walk with Lucas, almost expecting him to appear on a corner, to hug her, to tell her they could try again. But these fantasies would dissolve whenever she remembered the look in his eyes at the café, the heavy silence that carried the end of everything they had lived. One night, alone in the apartment that had once belonged to them, she was leafing through a photo album that she kept in the back of the closet. In each image, she saw the reflection of who she had been and what they could have been, and this made her cry with the sharpest pain she had ever felt. There was nothing more she could do to repair what had broken, and understanding this was like reliving the loss every morning. Amidst this scenario of reconstruction and regret, life went on as if the world insisted on reminding us that time does not stop to wait for broken hearts to mend. Lucas and Marina began to meet in places other than volunteering. They began to explore hidden cafes around the city, to share books and music that inspired them. In these exchanges, they discovered that they had much more in common than they imagined, but also differences that instigated them, that made each conversation become a learning experience. Lucas, still cautious, made it clear that he did not know when or if he would be ready for a relationship, and Marina, with the same serenity as always, said that she was in no hurry, that she enjoyed his company just the way it was, without needing labels or promises that would still sound empty. This mutual honesty became the foundation of a deep friendship, but filled with something more, something that both of them perceived, but neither of them dared to name. The seasons changed, bringing new tones to the scenery that surrounded his walks, and with them, Lucas realized that his heart no longer bled as before. There was longing, yes, but no longer the kind that tore at the inside, just a gentle melancholy that reminded him of what had been beautiful, but also of what needed to be left behind. He began to realize that the memories, although painful, were part of who he was now, but they didn't need to define who he would be from now on. The dilemma of opening himself up to the new no longer seemed so threatening, and one night when he and Marina were sitting by a lit fountain, sharing confidences, Lucas found himself smiling sincerely for the first time in a long time. When she commented, between laughs, how handsome he looked when he smiled without fear, he felt something inside him warm, as if his heart was finally beginning to remember what it was like to beat freely. During this same period, Helena, on her own journey, decided to write one last letter to Lucas. Not to ask for forgiveness, not to beg for a new chance, but to thank him. To thank him for the love they had experienced, for the man he was, for the memories that, despite everything, were true while they lasted. In the letter, he confessed that the greatest lesson he had learned was that love does not survive in silence, that every small omission, every unshared fear, every hidden insecurity, are cracks that, over time, turn into abysses. She asked him to be happy, to not let her mistake stop him from loving again. When she finished writing, she cried as if all the tears she had kept inside were flowing out at once, but when she folded the letter and put it in the envelope, she felt a lightness she had not known for a long time. It was the closing of a cycle, although painful, but necessary. Lucas received the letter weeks later and, upon reading it, he felt a whirlwind of emotions. The pain was still there, but there was also a strange relief, as if he could finally put an end to the story that had been holding him back. He kept the letter in a box along with other important memories, not as someone who cherishes the past, but as someone who understands that certain scars deserve to be remembered so that they don't happen again. That night, as he was walking back home, he met Marina at the door of the building. She was smiling, holding 2 coffees, and upon seeing her there, so simple and present, Lucas realized that, for the first time, he was not afraid of what could happen between them. He approached her, took her hand, and they walked together along the sidewalk lit only by the soft light of the street lamps, as if each step were a silent promise that life, despite everything, always offers new chances to those who have the courage to start over. The weeks continued to pass as if time had finally decided to collaborate in the reconstruction of everything that had been devastated. Spring brought with it the fresh green of the trees, the scent of flowers spread throughout the streets, and with this new season, Lucas began to feel that life was slowly inviting him to be reborn as well. His encounters with Marina, previously so casual and without commitment, evolved naturally, like a gentle dance in which neither of them needed to rush to fit in. On a clear afternoon, they decided to visit a small artistic village, where they would spend the day exploring studios, talking to artisans, and tasting specialty coffees. The sparkle in Lucas's eyes reflected the lightness he had not experienced for a long time, and each laugh shared with Marina seemed to take away a little more of the weight he was carrying. When, at the end of the day, she approached for a shy and still hesitant kiss, Lucas responded sweetly, feeling his heart race not with fear, but with excitement at knowing that he was still capable of loving again, of wanting someone else, of allowing himself to start over with someone who didn't bring ghosts, but rather the promise of a future in which each step would be built with sincerity. Marina, in turn, felt that her and Lucas's story was becoming more solid with each meeting, but she never rushed the pace of their relationship. She knew the value of giving space for old pains to find their place, without demanding that they disappear immediately. In each conversation, she offered understanding, in each silence, support, and in each gesture, she showed that love does not need to be voracious to be true. Together, they began to make small plans, short trips, new volunteer projects, and the certainty that they were learning to walk side by side, accepting the imperfections that each one carried. Lucas, still cautious, surprised Marina one night by asking how she would feel if she thought about sharing her life with him in a more definitive way one day. Marina smiled, moved, and replied that there was nothing more beautiful than seeing someone, after having been so hurt, have the courage to open their heart to love again. Meanwhile, Helena, on her own journey, experienced the consequences she could no longer avoid. Loneliness had become a constant companion, even when surrounded by people. The friendships that remained were superficial, because the true ones, built around her relationship with Lucas, had drifted away after the betrayal. The atmosphere of the studio, once her refuge, now echoed painful memories that prevented her from working as before. She tried to change her routine, look for new places, reinvent herself, but there was a shadow that accompanied her, reminding her every morning that she had lost not only the man she loved, but also herself. One sleepless night, she decided that she needed to leave that city so as not to go crazy. She sold the apartment, closed the doors of the studio and left in search of a new beginning in another region, but deep down, she knew that it didn't matter where she went, because the scars she carried were inside her and would travel with her, reminding her every day of the price one pays for thoughtless choices. Laura, who witnessed her brother-in-law's downfall and attempts to rebuild, also had to find her own balance. For months, she carried the burden of having been the first to suspect, of having seen signs that she could not prevent from happening. But little by little, with the closeness she developed with Lucas, she understood that the destiny of each person cannot be controlled by those she loves, that the most she can do is offer support when the other person needs it. She became a key player in Lucas's healing process, and when she saw his smile light up his face again, she also found her own peace. Deep down, Laura knew that their love as brothers-in-law had become something that transcended any family bond, a deep and loyal friendship, which she knew she would carry forever, no matter where life took them. On the last night they spent together before Marina embarked on a short trip to visit family, Lucas took her to a viewpoint where he used to go to think when everything seemed to fall apart. There, as the city light spread out like a sparkling sea, he held her hand and said, in a firm and calm voice, that he might never completely forget the pain he had experienced, but that he no longer wanted to let it define who he was or who he could be by her side. Marina hugged him, letting the tears flow, not from sadness, but from relief at knowing that he had finally chosen to move on. In that hug, they sealed a silent promise that they would build something new together, with respect, with patience, with the courage that only someone who has lost everything can have to start over with an open heart. At the same time, in a distant city, Helena was opening the boxes in the apartment she had just rented, alone, in silence. The phone, always within reach, never rang with the name she most wanted to see. The nights were long, and the days were cold, no matter the weather outside. As she looked out the window of her empty room, she understood that the pain she felt was not only for having been discovered, but for having killed with her own hands the love that could have lasted forever. In her heart, she still had the desire to see Lucas happy, but also the cruel certainty that she would never be able to share in that happiness. And so, each sunset she watched alone became a reminder of what she had destroyed, of how betrayal can devastate far beyond a relationship, affecting everything that is built around love. Lucas, in turn, felt that, despite all the hardships, he had found redemption in the simple act of continuing. He learned that starting over doesn't mean forgetting, but allowing yourself to write new stories, even knowing that the past will always be there to remind you of what once was. With Marina, he wasn't looking to replace what he had lost, but to build something unique, without comparisons, without rushing, just living each moment with the depth that he now knew how to value. He could see that each tear he shed had made him stronger, more sensitive, more aware of what really mattered. And it was in this maturation that he found not only the cure for his wounds, but also the key to opening the doors to a future that, although uncertain, no longer scared him. And so, each character went their own way: Helena, forever carrying the memory of what she did; Laura, firm in her unshakable friendship; Marina, with her generous heart capable of welcoming; and Lucas, with the courage of someone who chose to forgive themselves, love again and believe that, even after destruction, life can blossom where you least expect it. Now, we want to know from you, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, tell us if you have experienced or know someone who has gone through something similar. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this, which remind us that life, even when it hurts, also teaches us. Always remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy hearts, but families, dreams, and everything that is built with so much effort. Our channel does not support any type of betrayal. We are here to show how it corrodes everything around it, and so that, together, we can reflect on the importance of choices made with love and respect.